Hello and a very warm welcome to another edition of World Panorama. Like always, get ready to catch up on the biggest international news of the week. I am Sana Khan. Let's get straight to the top story this week. Now, Japan announced its defense budget that it will grow by 2.2% in the next fiscal year from April, posting the biggest rise in nearly 2 decades. The strategy that includes the revised National Defense Program guidelines and a midterm defense program could start the export of weapons from Japan for the first time since the Second World War. Now, Japan's first ever national security strategy may prove to be an inflection point in the 21st century Asia's history. Not only had Japan abided by a strict interpretation of its US-written pacifist constitution over the last 6 decades, but Japan's people had adopted pacifism as an important part of their national identity, and yet, somewhat suddenly, a country that has been not just wary but eager to avoid foreign military entanglements is now implementing a more proactive national security policy. Its plans are good for Japan, good for Asia and good for US interests. The approvals come at a time of strong concerns about the intentions of China and North Korea in the Southeast Asian region. Hence, it becomes imperative to understand the situation closely. I welcome Mr. R.N. Das, Senior Fellow at the Institute for Defence Studies and Analyses, someone who's also visited Japan and China more recently in the past few weeks. Welcome to the show, sir. But before I start talking to you about what's happening with Japan and its defence budget, let's have a look at this short report.
Japan released new defense guidelines to boost its military strength as it seeks closer ties with Asian partners to counter China. The move comes as Tokyo is embroiled in a bitter row with Beijing over islands in the East China Sea that both countries claim.
安全を守るための安倍政権の基本的な戦略を決定した、そしてお示しをしたところであります。
当然この記述というのは10年間ずっとこの安全保障環境の記述が、継続されることを想定しているわけではなく、関係改善が、進めば当然この、記述についても、見直すことが必要になるというふうに思っています。
Over the next 5 years, Japan will buy defense hardware including drones, stealth aircraft and amphibious vehicles. The military will also build a new marine unit, an amphibious force capable of retaking islands.
言ってみればその先制攻撃みたいなことを検討しているわけではないということだけはご理解いただきたいと思います。経済的にも歴史的にも文化的にも深いつながりがある国であります。大切な国として二国間の関係改善が
China reacted asking Japan to respect the fair and reasonable security concerns of countries in the region. The country feels Japan's policies in the military and security sphere are linked to its national development direction and will impact regional security.
和认真反省历史，尊重地区国家的正当合理的安全关切，顺应历史潮流，坚持走和平发展道路。而且我们也希望日本不要把
Meanwhile, the US Secretary of State John Kerry backed Japan's newly announced rearmament plan. He brushed aside misgivings about Japan's military spending as he sought to dispel concerns over its security implications in the region. The announcement of more Japanese military spending comes weeks after China established an air defense identification zone over the East China Sea, including over islands controlled by Japan.
All right, Mr. Das, let me start by asking you, is Japan, with this strategy, can be seen as moving forward from the decades-long pacifist approach that we're seeing?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. Japan is certainly moving from the its pacifist constitution to more active in defense matters. But there are reasons to that. The reason is very simple, as you in your opening remark very correctly said. It is the rise of China. Rise up rather assertive China. And there are already disputes between China and Japan, especially about the Senkaku Island, or which the Chinese called it the Diaoyu Island and Senkaku Island. It all started last year when Japan purchased the island, and now Japan is in administrative control of the island, but Chinese, they have the claim over the sovereignty. So that is the root cause, but of course historically there is historical animosity between Japan and China. but the recent this incident of this island, ADIZ, called Air Defense Identification Zone,
right,
which was unveiled by China on 23rd of November, that has really heightened the tension in the region. Reason being, it's not, no country will ever object to having this air defense identification zone. Most countries have, including Japan and USA had this air defense identification zone. But the problem here is that the claim of Japan, it overlaps with the claim of, the claim of China overlaps with the claim of Japan.
That's right.
So that's the problem. Basically, when this, the Chinese unveiled their air defense identification zone, the idea is to assert their claim over the Senkaku Island.
Right.
So that really triggers the tension, yes.
And many also say that indeed this is a sensible plan coming in from Japan, and also some say it was perhaps long overdue. Do you feel the same?
See, I think you will agree with me, the new Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, he is perceived to be a little hawkish, unlike the earlier Prime Minister. And ever since his re-election last year, there is a lot of expectation that Japan will be more active, more assertive in geopolitics, especially in Asia Pacific, and with regard to this the claim of sovereignty over Senkaku Island.
Right.
And he had some problem. The Premier Shinzo Abe had some problem because he didn't have absolute majority in the parliament, but now he has also the majority in the upper house. So he is comfortably placed to take any decisions. And this what do you call the new defense guideline must be seen in continuation of the overall the change of policy that Japan has started pursuing. When I was in Japan only, I think I was in there last month on 26th to 30th of November, Japan also unveiled another plans, like they have started they have established what they call the National Security Council,
right,
like USA, like we have. That also they have, and they have also a state secret bill, like we have Official Secret Act. So all this this new defense guideline needs to be seen in the light of all these development, because all these developments should be seen together. One defense, the increase.
So in a sense, Japan is trying to compete with China now head on, but are these moves enough really if we talk about balancing power in the region?
It's not a question of competition, it's a question of Japan's own security. It's not that I don't think anybody in Japan, I don't think Japan has the inclination or the capability to take on China. But Japan will certainly safeguard its own territory.
Right.
And the problem here is that nationalism in both the countries, you must see these development in the context of the nationalism, both in China and both in case of Japan. So that is at play. The nationalism, the rising nationalism in China and the rising nationalism in Japan.
Right.
These these development needs to be seen in that context also.
And what do you have to say about what the Chinese media has been saying ever since Japan announced this strategy? It says that the move is unwise, and it's also dangerous. Now, what's Japan then supposed to make of this when you talk that Japan is protecting its own territory?
Today, the China Daily has also blasted it, this move, Japanese move, and they say, the Chinese claim the Japan's new defense guideline and increase of its defense budget is at odds with their claim of pacifist constitution.
Yeah.
So far, Japan has been the torchbearer of peace and amity. Now, the Chinese, they say it is at odds. How do you say that you are a pacifist country when you are increasing your defense budget, when you decide to export him arms, which you never did earlier? So that's why they are critical of the Japanese. But similarly, the Japanese point is very clear. The Japanese say, look, you call peaceful rise. You claim China's peaceful rise, peaceful development. But when you look at your the expenditure in military expenditure and your military preparedness, it doesn't gel well with your claim of peaceful rise.
Right. Do you also then see, or would you call it a resurgence of Japanese militarism, or will it be too far-fetched to say that right now, because we are talking about Japan trying to safeguard its own territory?
You see, I won't call it, it is necessary for them. You can't help it. They don't have any other choice but to increase the defense budget and have a defense guideline in place. Otherwise, they will be more vulnerable to sort of threat from China. And they are adopting multiple strategies to deal with China. It is only one aspect. Their increasing defense expenditure is one aspect of it. And plus, they are trying to, their position is very clear. I had a discussion with the Japanese think tanks. They are trying to adopt multiple strategies to deal with rising China. One is, of course, their own security. They need to, it is very sacrosanct. They have to protect their own national interest, their territorial integrity, their claim over the sovereignty over Senkaku Island. That's one part of it. Second, they want to develop countervailing forces in the region. Like, first of all, they have their security relationship with the USA, it is there. They are trying to developing other sort of alliances with countries like India, maybe Vietnam, other countries. Of late they are also
trying. So all in all, Mr. Das, Japan is trying to protect its own territory, it's safeguarding its own interest. Perhaps so much talk in the international media also because of the timing at which the defense budget rise is coming. But thanks so much for putting things into perspective for our viewers. It was a pleasure having you on the show with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
With that, we take a very short break. Lots more in store up ahead. The latest on the unrest in Sudan is also coming up. I'll be right back. You're watching World Panorama. After days of unrest in South Sudan, the army says rebels loyal to the country's former deputy president have seized control of a key rural town. It's feared that an alleged coup is increasing ethnic tensions in South Sudan, the world's youngest nation. The United Nations now puts the death toll at between 400 to 500. It says more exact figures are not yet available.
Thousands of refugees sought shelter in United Nations bases in Juba, the capital of South Sudan, even as fighting between rival groups of soldiers intensified in Sudan. The UN mission reported that the fighting spread to areas beyond the country's capital to the state of Jonglei. 3 days of street battles between the factions have left part of the capital in ruins after fighting broke out on Sunday night.
They are targeting Nuer particularly. They even try to ask you some question if you don't speak the language that they want you to speak. For instance, if you are speaking Nuer language, you will be targeted.
But the government played down suggestions that the conflict had an ethnic element. The government has termed it a failed coup attempt by former Vice President Riek Machar. Sudan's information minister urged people to return to their homes.
وهسه في الوقت الحالي بقى ما في اي حاجه انا جاي نقول لكم انه انتوا بعد كده كل زول يرجع في بيت بتاعه.
But former Vice President Machar denied government allegations that he tried to stage a coup. He denied any link with fighting that began on Sunday, accusing President Salva Kiir of inciting tribal and ethnic violence to cover his own failings. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State John Kerry called on the warring factions to find a peaceful solution to the political disputes.
The government should respect the rule of law, and the people of South Sudan should be able to realize their full potential in peace.
US also urged its citizens to leave the country immediately and said it was suspending normal operations at its embassy. Up to 500 people are reported to have been killed since Sunday.
And the White House demanded that the former National Security Agency contractor Edward Snowden be returned to the US so as to investigate charges against him on leaking classified documents. The latest development comes in the wake of an open letter written by Snowden to Brazilians offering to help investigate US surveillance of Brazilian citizens.
We believe that Mr. Snowden ought to return to the United States where he faces charges for leaking classified information and where he will receive full due process and protections.
The US seeking to get Edward Snowden back to the country to investigate charges against him. This on the same day as the former NSA contractor sought asylum in Brazil. In a letter to Brazilians, he said, and I quote, "I have expressed my willingness to assist wherever appropriate and lawful, but unfortunately the United States government has worked very hard to limit my ability to do so, going so far as to force down the presidential plane of Evo Morales to prevent me from traveling to Latin America. Until a country grants permanent political asylum, the US government will continue to interfere with my ability to speak." Unquote. The Brazilian Foreign Ministry said that they are not planning to respond to Snowden's letter yet. Meanwhile, the US also criticized the EU Parliament for its plan to invite Snowden to testify over the US surveillance program.
We have strong concerns. We've had very, very direct dialogue with our colleagues and compatriots in the European Union. I personally do not believe it rises to the dignity of this body to have someone who is wanted for a crime in the United States for stealing information that has jeopardized the lives of U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan and other places around the world.
There have been uproar in several countries, including Brazil, over reports of spying by the US. In September, Brazilian lawmakers said they plan to send a commission to Russia to speak with Snowden about the issue. Snowden is currently living in Russia under temporary asylum that is due to expire in August.
And time for a quick wrap of what else has been in the spotlight in international politics this week. This is the Globe Watch.
Indian lawmakers said that the US should apologize and drop charges against Indian diplomat who was strip-searched after her arrest in New York last week. Devyani Khobragade, India's Deputy Consul General in New York, was arrested for allegedly underpaying her nanny and committing visa fraud to get her into the United States. Khobragade, who was released on $250,000 bail after pleading not guilty to the charges and surrendering her passport, faces a maximum of 15 years in jail if convicted on both counts. Russian President Vladimir Putin said he has not met with former US spy agency contractor Edward Snowden, to whom Russia granted political asylum this year. Documents leaked by Snowden have revealed details of widespread surveillance by the National Security Agency and ignited a furor over the agency's spying. Snowden is living in Russia under temporary asylum that is due to expire in August. Senior officials of the United Nations, the United States and Russia began a series of meetings in Geneva on Friday to review prospects for a second international conference aimed at ending the fighting and starting a process of political transition in Syria. Opposition's participation in the long overdue Geneva Conference on Syrian peace has not been confirmed. Iran and the P5+1 group resumed on Thursday in Geneva, Switzerland, the expert-level talks on the implementation of a nuclear deal they had earlier reached. The European Union delegation held a discussion with the Iranian delegates Thursday afternoon, which lasted about 2 hours. Iran and the P5+1 group struck a deal in Geneva on 24th November, in which Iran agreed to freeze part of its nuclear program in exchange for a limited ease of sanctions which hurt its economy. Anti-government protesters resumed marches in Bangkok on Friday, trying to energize supporters in the center of the Thai capital before a planned mass rally at the weekend to put pressure on Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra to step down. Yingluck called a snap election last week when the protests reached their height. She remains caretaker premier until the February 2 vote, but has refused to push back the date to allow the drawing up of political reforms demanded by the protesters.
And take a look at the winners and losers in the world of sports this week.
Investigators maintained a partial shutdown of construction on Manassas World Cup Stadium on Tuesday as officials continued to investigate the death of a worker. Construction was initially shut down on December 16 after public prosecutors asked for work to halt, pending investigations seeking to guarantee workers' safety after the death of the 5th construction worker to die in stadiums being built to host the 2014 World Cup of Soccer in 12 cities. Liverpool and Uruguay striker Luis Suarez received the Player of the Year award from the English Football Supporters Federation in London. Suarez collected the award at a special presentation held at Arsenal's Emirates Stadium, following a year in which some remarkable performances from the Uruguayan went up against moments of extreme controversy. Since returning to play for Liverpool this season, Suarez has often been outstanding, his 17 goals helping them to second place in English Premier League after 16 matches, just 2 points behind Arsenal. Former Italy international and AC Milan midfielder Gennaro Gattuso is under investigation for alleged match fixing. Police also arrested 4 individuals in connection with the case, which is believed to have involved more than 30 matches stretching back to 2009. Gattuso, 35, twice won the Champions League with Milan. He was sacked as manager by Serie B Palermo in September after a string of bad results. Group hugs and beery celebrations for the retrieval of the ashes were splashed all over Australian newspapers on Wednesday as the nation hailed a cricket team that only weeks before was regarded largely with derision. Australia beat England by 150 runs on Tuesday to win the 3rd test in Perth and reclaim the ashes from their bitter rivals, with skipper Michael Clarke hailing an outstanding effort. England were all out for 353 on the final day at the Waka ground to hand the home side an unbeatable 3-0 lead in the 5-match series.
And time now for the very latest from the world of movies, music and lifestyle. Here's our entertainment wrap. Leonardo DiCaprio and Martin Scorsese unveiled the greedy world of banking in their new film, The Wolf of Wall Street. The duo teamed up at the movie's US premiere in New York. The film, which hits US theaters on 25th December, is already full of Oscar buzz after receiving Golden Globe nominations for both DiCaprio and Scorsese. The film is based on the book by Jordan Belfort, a former trader who ended up in jail in the 90s for defrauding investors out of millions of dollars. Belfort was arrested after defrauding investors as of much as $200 million and spent 22 months in a federal prison camp. Rare recordings of 59 songs by the Beatles went on sale for the first time after Apple Records, a label founded by the group in 1968, made them available for download. Apple Corps Limited had said it would release a series of tracks from the early 1960s that were previously only available as bootleg recordings. Among the songs on the album, the Beatles' bootleg recordings 1963 that were released on iTunes are versions of She Loves You, A Taste of Honey and There's a Place, as well as outtakes, demos and live performances recorded for BBC Radio. Hugh Jackman pulled double duty as he hosted and performed at the 32nd Christmas in Washington concert with US President Barack Obama. Joining Jackman was the Backstreet Boys, Sheryl Crow, Anna Kerdnick, Janelle Monáe and Pat Monahan, who all entertained the crowd with Christmas classics. Each year, the event is attended by the US President and numerous Washington VIPs and ends with the first family joining the performers on stage for a choral. 8 times Oscar nominee, famously known as the Lawrence of Arabia, Peter O'Toole passed away on 14 December after a prolonged battle with illness in London. O'Toole had survived a bout of stomach cancer in the 70s. He was 81 and is now survived by his 3 daughters. O'Toole never won the Oscar and holds the record for most nominations without a win. He was, however, given an honorary Oscar in 2003, an accolade he initially refused, saying he believed he still had time to win the award competitively. That's all we have for you in this edition of World Panorama. See you next week, same time, with more international news. Till then, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Twinkling lights, bustling holiday markets and elaborate window displays light up Paris this Christmas. Parisians and foreigners alike bubble with cheer despite a tough economy. Merry Christmas from our entire team here at World Panorama.